So let's get going. This is where we left off last time. We were talking about Altman and Wellman's argument. We were almost done with it, so I'm just going to rehearse a little more what we talked about and then move on to Walzer, who has a similar, at least in spirit, not in details, idea about immigration. So Altman and Wellman and Walzer, they all agree on the main point, which is, in principle, countries that have a right to self-determination have a right to exclude immigrants. Right? The idea is that sort of part of your self-determination as a nation is that you get to decide who to admit as a new member. And that idea is one that Altman and Wellman and Walzer are in different forms trying to make sense of. It's an intuitive idea. Right? And so here's the way that Altman and Wellman go. They have these two steps, connecting self-determination and freedom of association through these steps, and then freedom of association to the right to exclude. And so you get this very straightforward argument, right? It's only like 6 claims here. And the conclusion is the legitimate state wants to reject immigrants. It has a right to do so. It's a very strong claim, right? Doesn't mean just like it can have some limitations on immigration, or it can keep terrorists out if a terrorist wants. No, it can just keep anyone out. Right? Unless there is some reason to override this right or something, like say in the case of a refugee or something, you think the refugee situation is so dire that that person's situation overrides. It's more important than respecting the right to self-determination. But in principle, if you have a right to self-determination, you just get to exclude anyone. And the claims here are pretty straightforward, right? It's an idea that, okay, self-determination means freedom to associate. Freedom to associate means the right to exclude. It's done. Right? All right. So, here are the key claims, right? So first is the connection between self-determination and freedom of association. Then freedom of association and exclusion, right? Then, of course, this idea that actually that's what immigrants want to do. They want to associate in the way relevant to the argument. Right? It's more philosophically precise. First, let's look at those first two. These two, Altman and Wellman defend by drawing a set of analogies. Right? So a set of analogies with individuals, groups, and then states. We talked a little bit about this last time, so I'm going to go quickly. So here's the analogy with individuals. So they draw the analogy with marriage. Right? They say marriage is a case where you can see that people who have autonomy have a right to be individually self-determining, determine their own fate, run their own affairs as long as they don't harm others. Very similar to the way we think countries. Not the same, but it's an analogy, right? So very similar. Say they have a right to exclude other people as well because of their right to self-determination. Right? So the idea here is that it's morally wrong to force people to marriage. So forced marriage is wrong. It's an intuition that they think you'll share. And it's wrong because it violates your right to be a self-determining individual. Now, that's a form of association, so it's morally wrong to force people into at least these type of unwanted associations like marriage, but probably just unwanted associations across the board. That's wrong because it violates the autonomy or the self-determination of the individual, and so then it follows, right, that your right to make your own autonomous decisions, or your own right to self-determination, includes a right to free association, and therefore a right to exclude people who you don't want to marry. Right? So you get a right to say no. And so they say, so as with individuals, so with countries. All the values and ideas are the same, the logic is going to be the same, as with individuals, so with countries. So then they slowly start extending this, right? They say, well, maybe you think countries are very different from individuals. For example, there's a lot more people living in a country rather than one, right? So, okay, let's start looking at a situation that has lots more people. So they look at groups, right? So analogy with groups and their admission policies. So they use the example of Augusta National, right? The golf club that doesn't like to admit women. And they say, well, we think that it's morally wrong to force something like Augusta National. You might think this is distasteful. Bunch of crusty old white guys, and maybe they're jackasses and whatever, right? Okay, fine. But to say that is one thing. To say that we should have like the police show up and force them to like walk the women in, like we walked black people into schools in the 1950s, right? Like that's a different situation. Like in schools, maybe that's a different case, but Augusta National, you shouldn't force their hand. I think you can accept that. They seem to think that's plausible. Most people think that's plausible. Nobody really is on the barricades about Augusta National, right? For all the talk about injustice that we have, Augusta National is really not really in our sights. Right? Yeah, say.
So what's the first premise saying,
Well, it's excuse me. So the first premise is just saying, is starting with the intuition that they hope you'll share, right? They think we believe that it would be pretty clearly wrong to force a club like Augusta National to accept women. Right? They have the Boy Scouts as another example, right? You might use other possible cases, like I think last time I said, like if you force the college Republicans to admit Democrats or something, right? Like it's that's a silly thing to do, right? That would be wrong because you're ruining the association. Of course, they don't use those. They use things like Augusta National because they think, if you remember in general, right, the right to self-determination works in the following way. It's a right to make decisions freely, including decisions that other people might think are not that great. Right? And so Augusta National doesn't allow women. Most readers, including probably you and me, think it's a dumb thing to exclude women from your club, right? But if it's their right to decide, then you got to respect that too.
What about the white and black influence?
So the public schools thing? Yeah, good. So most people think, including them, that there is a difference between private associations and things like public schools, right? Or things that have a public dimension, including private schools as well. So that's actually the way that the Supreme Court at least treats that, right? So the Supreme Court recognizes a right to free association, but not with certain things. Well, it's a bunch of legal clauses to this, but one of them is things that have a appropriately public dimension cannot exclude people on the basis of race and so on. But you can exclude people on the basis of gender. That's what Augusta National does. That's right, for example, yeah. Or what's the... what can I come up with a name? There's a old women's college here in town. Yeah, thank you. Right. So yeah, Bennett doesn't let you in, right? And that's the flip side of Augusta National. If you think it would be wrong for the government to say, that's sexist, can't do that, have to start accepting women, then you should also think, right, that generally speaking it's wrong to force associations to accept people. Unless there's some overriding thing, right? So like, if there's an issue of racism here where you think that's an overriding public concern that we stop types of racism that are going on, and especially in schools, then you might think, okay, we override, in these cases, private schools, freedom of association. But the first initial step is there's the right to freely associate. So you point out a good thing, right? So like it's at groups, in the level of groups, it's a little less obviously true than it is at the level of individuals, right? So individuals are free to make racist decisions about marriage. If I don't want to marry a black person, right, there's no one who can force me, even if I say, it make me crummy thing to say and believe and live on, right? But no one's going to force me to accept a black person as my marriage partner. Right? Whereas we do that with people who want to have all white schools or something. Right? And of course, at the state level, once we go to countries, even more close to what they want to talk about, there are a variety of additional constraints. Right? So, anyway, we'll get to that. Right? And a little while, did you have your hand up a little moment ago, Laura?
I did. I'm still mulling over it. But I'm just thinking, how is a country more like, say, like a club than a public school?
Yeah, good. Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, how is a country more like a club than like a public school? So one pretty this part of Altman and Wellman's book has drawn perhaps the most attention of the book, because a lot of philosophers have found the argument powerful, but also something they found worrying. Right? And a standard line of attack has been this one, right? So there's actually a categorical difference between clubs and countries. For one, clubs are voluntary and countries are not, right? You get the if you don't want to be, like, let's say Augusta National says, Laurel, we'll make an exception. You can actually be a member. And you say, nah, don't feel like it. Nothing changes in your life, right? Like, they just let you be. Of course, if the U.S. government says, hey, Laurel, we continue to treat you as one of our members, lucky you. And you say, nah, never mind. They say, like, well, actually, you don't have a choice, right? So the law will apply to you, and they will enforce it on you, right? And so on. So that might be a major difference, right? Such that the analogy starts breaking down. The third step of their argument is to draw two countries, so they think that the same ideas do apply to countries, but that's much more questionable than the other steps. It's a good worry. Yeah. Tamir? Can you give an example? Like a religion or something? Like you can. Would they allow you to leave? Like, without having to, I mean, you can leave the country, but you have to literally leave it, right? Like you have to actually move to Mexico or Canada or something. There are no clubs like that.
Be born into the mob family.
I guess so, yeah. I guess so, yeah. No, you have to be made, right? Like you have to, being the son of him, wouldn't be a daughter, I guess, would be a son of a mob member, doesn't make you a member yourself.
I don't have much experience in the mob.
Yeah. I mean, like religions work like that, right? Like you're born Jewish or Muslim, like, by being born in a family or a country like that. But in those cases, it's hard, right? Like Jewish, you can't really leave behind, but it's because it's like a weird combination of ethnic and religion at the same time. Like you can be an atheist and still be a Jew. It's much harder to be a Christian and an atheist at the same time, for example. But I can't think of any clubs that you'd be born in. I mean, you can imagine, right? Like say that Augusta says anyone born to an Augusta member is immediately from birth an Augusta member as well, as long as they're boys. Right? But I guess the point that Laurel was raising, at least, yeah, the point of saying that was, in those cases, if you say, like you turn 18, you say, I don't want to have anything to do with Augusta. I don't want to pay the fees. I don't like golf, and I don't like those people, whatever. Right? They let you go. And if they don't let you go, then you can call the police on them. Right? Like they're wrong for not letting you go. And of course, governments don't do that. Right? Governments don't let you go. They say, well, if you want to go, you have to actually literally pick up all your stuff, sell all your stuff, move out, and move to a different country. Hope that they'll take you. And if you don't like that, if you want to stay and not be a member, you're going to get coerced. They throw you in jail, or they forcibly take your money. So that's this analogy here. So Augusta can't do that. You can't say if you want to stay living in Georgia, then you got to be a member of Augusta. Can't say that. All right. So the basic argument here goes the same way, right? So groups and admission policies seem to have some similarities, at least. Maybe not all the way, but at least similar. So it's wrong to force a group like Augusta National to accept certain people. Membership in a group like that is a form of association. So it's morally wrong, at least in these cases of associations like Augusta National, to force them to have new members. Now, what's wrong about it, right? Okay, why would it be wrong? They say same argument, right? Just like you as an individual who are free to make a decision about who you want to marry and who you don't want to marry, because you have autonomy and self-determination. So too, the group ought to be free to decide who they want to associate with or accept as a member and who they don't want to accept as a member. The group itself has freedom or autonomy or self-determination. Of course, if you're not happy with thinking about freedom or self-determination in collectivist terms, this is going to start to worry you, right? So someone like Tesson would say, no. Groups like that don't have that. They don't have autonomy. They don't have self-determination. But they're happy with this, right? They think it's plausible. And if you believe in self-determination of countries, you definitely have to be willing to think that groups can have self-determination too. So, anyway, these are wrong because they violate the autonomy of the group involved. The group should be free to make its own decisions about who to accept. And so therefore a group to make its own autonomous decisions includes the freedom to exclude, right? Freedom of association and freedom to exclude. So just as individual self-determination allows you to say no to others in marriage, so too group self-determination allows you to say no to others who want to join you, who want to become a member of that group. Note, right, the thing that I just pointed out, said like we're talking here about the group self-determination, right? The group as such. So there's a unit, the group, that is different from just the individual members together, right? So we have a collective agency, the group. What Altman and Wellman have to be saying here, right, in order for the analogy to the group level to go through, is that it's who's being wronged once. Like let's say you're a woman and you start showing up. You say I'm a member, like, and force them somehow to treat you as a member. You're wronging someone. Right? Who are you wronging? Are you wronging the members or are you wronging the group? If you have at some level you have to say you're wronging the group, right? Because they think self-determination is an irreducibly collective thing. So the harm will have to be located at the group level. If that sounds strange to you, if you think it's not the group that's being wrong, it's actually the members that make up the group, then you start thinking about self-determination of groups at least in a different terms, right? It's an individualist way of thinking about it. It's the individual members' freedom of association that's being violated. Each of those individual members are now forced in an association with you, the new member. And that's wrong just the same way as marriage was wrong, right? Because you're just forcing them individually in an association with you. But they don't want to do that, right? They want to start moving towards the group level here. So they want to say, no, it's not just the individuals who are wrong. It's the group itself that is being wronged. So it might be a little less intuitive, at least. Right, so they need it to be the group because their argument relies on it. All right, so then here finally, right, they say, first think about free associations like clubs. Then second, well, if you think about that clubs are voluntary and so different as states, let's think about states then, right? So that's how they build up their argument. They say, first start with individuals, then we start clubs, and then we'll do states. So here are states, but then we can't think of just immigration because that's what we're trying to figure out, right? So you think about a different context. And so they think about this annexation case. Say it's wrong for one legitimate state to be annexed by another. So a state that has the right to self-determination, you cannot annex, just occupy it. Right? But they say being annexed is a form of association. Therefore, it's morally wrong to force legitimate states in at least these type of unwanted associations, but probably in general, right? Like annexations. It's wrong because it violates a state's autonomy or right to self-determination. And so it follows then that the state's right to make these autonomous decisions includes a right to freedom of association and therefore a right to exclude. So again, just as individual and group self-determination has a right to say no, so too states' self-determination has a right to say no. And that's how they try to convince you of these premises, right? That the step from self-determination to freedom of association to the right to exclude goes through unproblematically at the level of states. So this is supposed to be their answer to your question, Laurel, right? So, yeah, sure, states are different than groups, but the logic is the same throughout. So far, so good? Yeah, Ryan.
Wasn't the last time your beef with that was that you said that annexations are not analogous to an individual coming into a country?
Yeah, that's part of the argument. Yeah, I think it's weird. I mean, I think immigration is not correctly described as a way of associating with states. So even if we accept all of this, it's not clear that you can apply this to immigration context. I actually think that it's also strange to say that being annexed is a form of association. Being annexed sounds more like being swallowed up to. But anyway, even being extinguished as an agent might be, like as a collective agent anyway, might be at stake, which is. Anyway. I mean, my main worry here is that they are playing they're flipping between the individualist and the collectivist senses of self-determination. So, for example, in the case of Augusta National, I think the intuitive idea that it's wrong to force Augusta National to admit women relies on the assumption, on the intuition that it's wrong to force the individual members to associate with women if they don't want to. I'm not quite sure I see what kind of self-determination at the group level is being harmed, because I'm not sure that members want to go and associate with the group as a unit. They want to become part of the group. That's a different thing. So I think they rely on the intuitions that are most plausible at the individualist level, and then draw conclusions that apply at the collective level, because they want to draw them at the level of states or countries. So that's the. I don't know. You seem more confused. Okay. All right. All right. So here are a couple questions. Well, the one we just asked, right? Is annexation a form of association? If so, by whom? Right. State of the members. Again, that's the individualist versus the collectivist issue. And it has to be the state for them, right? And then the following question is, well, even if we accept that, right, if one state does something to another state, and that's a kind of association between states, we have to wonder whether annexation is also analogous to immigration, right, where that whatever the state would be doing to the other state is the same that the immigrant would be doing to the place they want to immigrate. This is another weird thing about it, the analogy. Like, if there's a violation of freedom of association here, it's the U.S. invades Canada, say. It seems that the Canadian self-determination is violated. But if an immigrant comes into the U.S., the claim is that U.S. self-determination is being violated. So it's not lining up that way, right? This is not showing that association hurts the. What they should show is that self-determination of the annexor is at stake here, but it's not. Right. The annexor is doing the swallowing up, just like the host country is doing the swallowing up. So. All right. So finally, I try to put this out, so hopefully it'll be a little clearer, right? There's two versions of the right to self-determination or freedom of association. There's an individualist version. That's the one that, for example, Hell, they discuss in the earlier chapters, right? David Hell thinks of self-determination that way. And so then you have to ask, well, are unwanted immigrants wanting to associate if we think about in self-determination individualist ways? And then if the answer is yes, you have to wonder, like, okay, does the state actually have that type of a right? Now we know on Altman and Wellman's view, they explicitly do not want to think of the state's self-determination in this individualist view, right? Because they don't want to have a voluntary idea about the state. They think it can be forced into the state, and that's okay. But it does mean that the self-determination of the state itself happens truly at the group level. It's irreducibly collective, etc., etc. So this whole top half of this